Hey everyone, ready to tackle Intro to Philosophy at CWI. I hear Kantian ethics is on the syllabus.
Oh, it's a tough one, but super interesting.
That's why we're doing this deep dive. We'll make those complex ideas a little less intimidating. Think of it as like a cheat sheet for FieldGal 101.
Yeah, we're going to make sure you can walk into class feeling confident.
So to get us started, we've got articles, lecture notes, even some philosophical debates.
Basically everything to get a solid grasp on Kantian ethics. But don't worry.
Right, no need to get overwhelmed. We're going to distill it all down.
Exactly. To the most important stuff.
We're talking the categorical imperative, treating people as means versus ends.
Oh, and why Kant thinks lying is always wrong. Even to save a life. Heavy stuff.
And to help us navigate this philosophical maze, we've got an expert with us.
Happy to be here.
All right, so before we get to the really mind-bending stuff, our sources start with some background on Kant himself.
Right, like who he was, the world he lived in.
What are the key takeaways there?
Well, Kant was an 18th century German philosopher. And honestly, his ideas about reason and morality kind of revolutionized Western thought.
Wow, still relevant today.
Mhm.
That's impressive. What exactly was so revolutionary about his approach to ethics?
One of the big things was his focus on what he called a priori reasoning.
Okay, a priori reasoning. Sounds kind of intimidating. Break it down for us.
So imagine you're putting together a puzzle. You've got all the pieces, but no picture. You still figure out how they fit.
Yeah, you use the shapes, the logic of it.
Exactly. You don't need to see the finished picture to know where each piece goes. That's kind of like a priori reasoning.
Yeah.
Using logic and reason to figure out universal truths regardless of like what we see around us.
Ah, I see. So it's not about observing how people actually act.
Right.
It's about figuring out how they should act, based on pure reason.
Exactly. For Kant, morality wasn't just about like describing what people do. It was about what they must do, regardless of their circumstances or desires, you know. And he thought a priori reasoning was the way to unlock those universal moral principles.
Makes sense. Okay, so that brings us to the cornerstone of Kantian ethics, the famous categorical imperative.
Yeah, it's the big idea. It pops up everywhere in our sources.
So it must be pretty important. What is it exactly?
It's the golden rule, basically, like a universal moral law. Applies to everyone.
So it's not just a suggestion, it's a command, like, thou shalt not.
Precisely. And it's completely different from what Kant called hypothetical imperatives. Those depend on your desires, right? Like if you want to get an A in FHL 101, you should study hard.
Right, that only applies if you actually care about getting a good grade.
Yeah, but the categorical imperative, it doesn't care about what you want. It binds you simply because you're, well, a rational being.
I'm starting to see the difference. So the categorical imperative applies no matter what.
Exactly. And our sources actually dive into a bunch of different ways to think about it, how it works in real life.
Okay, let's unpack some of those. One that keeps coming up is the idea of universalizability.
Right, universalizability.
Can you give us a real-world example just to make it a little clearer?
Sure, let's think about stealing. Like imagine if everyone just stole whenever they wanted something. What would happen?
Total chaos. I mean, no one's property would be safe.
Exactly. Society couldn't function that way. So because you can't rationally will that everyone should steal, stealing is wrong according to the categorical imperative.
So it's like a test. You apply it to any action and see if it would work universally.
Exactly. If it leads to contradiction, if it would just fall apart, if everyone did it, then it's morally wrong.
Makes sense. But the categorical imperative goes beyond just actions, right? It also talks about how we treat other people,
Right.
which leads us to another formulation, treating people as ends rather than just means.
Okay, yeah, that's a big one.
What does that actually mean in simple terms?
It means recognizing the inherent worth of every person. You can't just use people as tools to get what you want.
So it's about respect, basically.
Yes. Respecting their autonomy, their ability to make their own choices. Think about it. Paying someone a fair wage for their work, that recognizes their value.
Right. They're contributing something. You're not just taking advantage.
Exactly. But like deceiving someone to get what you want, that's treating them as a means to your own end. Not cool.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So universalizability and treating people as ends, these are starting to feel like solid moral guidelines.
They are. And there's one more piece of the categorical imperative our sources highlight. Autonomy.
Right. Autonomy. What's Kant's take on that?
For Kant, autonomy is more than just making choices. It's about making those choices based on reason, not just whims or desires, you know.
So like having an inner moral compass.
Exactly. It's about being self-governing, guided by moral principles, not just impulses. And respecting someone's autonomy means respecting their right to make their own choices, even if you don't agree with them. As long as those choices don't, violate the categorical imperative, of course.
This is all starting to click. We've got universalizability, treating people as ends, and autonomy, all coming from this one big idea. A categorical imperative. I'm starting to see why it's such a big deal.
It's a really powerful concept, and it leads to some pretty challenging conclusions about how we should live, but insightful too.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork. We've got a sense of Kant, his thing for a priori reasoning, and we've even unpacked the categorical imperative a bit. Where do we go from here?
Well, now we can start looking at some of the specific duties that come from the categorical imperative for ourselves and how we interact with others.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
And that's where things get really interesting. Ready to dive into those duties?
Definitely. Let's see how this categorical imperative actually plays out in everyday life. Like practical stuff.
Okay, well, one thing that makes Kant's ethics different is the emphasis on duty versus inclination.
Duty versus inclination.
Yeah.
Break that down for me.
Okay, so imagine you're walking down the street and you see someone drop their wallet.
Okay.
You could totally pick it up, keep the money, no one would know.
Tempting.
Right. But you also know stealing's wrong. Now, you could return the wallet because you want to look good.
Right.
Or maybe you're afraid of getting caught.
So that wouldn't be acting from duty. There'd be self-interest.
Exactly. But if you return it simply because you know it's the right thing to do,
Yeah.
that stealing is wrong, period. No matter what. That's acting from duty.
So even if I'm tempted, the reason I give it back is because of my moral obligation.
That's the key. And for Kant, that's what makes an action truly moral. Doing the right thing just because it's right, not because it benefits you.
Okay, that makes sense. Our sources also talk about different types of duties, though. Perfect duties and imperfect duties.
Right.
What's the difference there?
So perfect duties, those are the ones with absolutely no exceptions. They're absolute. The thou shalt nots of morality.
So not stealing.
Exactly. Stealing is always wrong, no matter what. Lying's another one. For Kant, lying violates that universalizability thing we talked about. Because if everyone lied all the time, trust would be impossible.
Yeah, society would just crumble. So perfect duties are non-negotiable.
Exactly. The moral bedrock. Now, imperfect duties, those are a bit more flexible. They're still obligations, but they allow for some wiggle room in how we fulfill them.
Okay, give me an example. I need a concrete example.
Sure. Think about the duty to help others. Kant would say we should contribute to the well-being of others, but it's not an absolute duty, not stealing.
So I don't have to donate all my money to charity or volunteer every free minute.
Exactly. You have some freedom in how you fulfill that duty. Could be volunteering, donating to a cause, even just helping a friend in need. The important thing is, actively trying to make the world better.
So with imperfect duties, it's more about the spirit of the law.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Oh, and one more thing about duties. Kant thought perfect duties trump imperfect ones, if they ever clash.
Oh, that sounds complicated. When would that even happen?
Imagine you're hiding a refugee in your house, right? And a soldier comes knocking, asking if you've seen anyone suspicious.
Ooh, tough situation.
Right. So lying is a perfect duty, can't do it. But helping someone escape harm, that could be seen as an imperfect duty.
Wow. So what do you do?
Well, for Kant, it's clear. You can't lie, even if it puts someone in danger.
That seems harsh. So even in extreme cases, perfect duties always win.
For Kant, yep. He believed that upholding those absolute moral principles is crucial, even when it leads to hard choices.
I see why some people criticize Kantian ethics for being too rigid.
Yeah, that's a common critique. Real-life dilemmas are messy, right?
Right.
Sometimes it seems like bending a rule, even a perfect duty, could prevent something worse. But Kant wouldn't budge on those absolutes.
Okay, so we've got duties down. What about this kingdom of ends idea? Our sources mentioned that a few times.
Oh yeah, the kingdom of ends. That's Kant's vision of a perfect moral community, where everyone acts according to the categorical imperative all the time.
So everyone's super rational and always does the right thing. Sounds pretty utopian.
It is. But for Kant, it wasn't just a daydream, It was a model for how we should structure society.
Okay, how would that even work? What would a Kantian society look like?
Well, first off, it'd have to prioritize individual autonomy and dignity.
So no dictatorships.
Nope, definitely not. Kant believed rational beings have the right to govern themselves, to help create the laws that govern them. So probably some form of democracy where everyone has a say, rights are protected.
Makes sense. And it'd have to treat everyone equally, right?
Absolutely. Remember, treating people as ends. That means recognizing everyone's inherent worth no matter their background. So a Kantian society would be all about social justice. No oppression, no exploitation.
So Kant would probably be on board with, like, human rights and equality for all.
Totally. His ideas were super influential on modern human rights movements. It's not just a theory, it has real-world implications.
Wow. So this isn't just some abstract philosophy. It's about building a better world.
Exactly. It's about how we live together, how we create a just and ethical society. And our sources even touch on religion a bit, how that connects to Kantian ethics.
Oh, right. Religion. Does that play a role in his thinking?
It does. Kant was a Christian, but he also thought faith should be grounded in reason, not blind acceptance.
So no dogma, no just taking things on faith.
Nope. He believed we should use our reason to examine religious claims, figure out what makes sense.
So what a Kantian approach to religion even look like?
Well, remember, morality for Kant is all about the categorical imperative, and he believed that actually reflects God's will.
So basically, God wants us to be rational, treat each other right.
Exactly. True religious faith, for Kant, would mean living a moral life, making choices based on reason, treating others with dignity, upholding those universal moral principles.
It's not just about what you believe, it's about how you act.
That's the core of it. True religion and true morality, they go hand in hand.
I'm starting to see how these Kantian ideas can apply to so many different areas of life. But didn't our sources also mention some criticisms of Kantian ethics?
Right. No philosophical theory is perfect, and Kant's no exception.
So what are some of the main challenges people bring up?
Well, one of the biggest ones is that it's just too rigid, too inflexible, those absolute perfect duties. Critics say those can sometimes lead to weird results.
Like that example with the refugee and the soldier.
Yes,
What?
exactly. Sometimes it seems like the right thing to do is break a rule, even a perfect duty, to prevent something worse happening. But Kant was all about sticking to those absolute principles no matter what.
So the critics would say Kantian ethics doesn't always deal well with, like, the complexity of real-world moral dilemmas.
Yeah, that's one critique. Another one is that it's maybe too focused on reason and duty.
Like, what about emotions, relationships, compassion?
Right. Some people think Kant's approach is too cold, too impersonal. It's all about the rules, not about feelings. And some also argue that it's just too demanding. Always acting from duty, never letting your feelings or self-interest influence you. That's a high bar.
Yeah, it does seem kind of superhuman.
It can. But even with those criticisms, Kantian ethics is still one of the most important and influential ethical systems we have.
It's definitely given me a lot to think about.
Good. That's what philosophy is all about. Thinking deeply about these questions, figuring out how to live a moral life.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly helpful. I feel way more prepared for my FHL 101 class now. I might even be, dare I say it, excited for those readings and discussions.
That's the spirit. And remember, philosophy is a journey, not a destination. Keep asking questions, keep challenging yourself, and keep exploring those big ideas.
I will. And a huge thanks to you for being our guide through this whole philosophical thing.
My pleasure. Always up for a good philosophical debate.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this Kantian ethics deep dive. We hope you found it, well, insightful, and maybe even a little bit mind-bending. Until next time.